I see the biggest problem as being most of the time is people running their personal expenses without counting them as personal expenses or compensation, or they
Mhm.
wash money back and forth. There's like, oh, I've got a project over in this residential property and I need to cover it with money from this residential. I'll just write a check. So you see the money going back and forth. That's commingle. Once you
Right.
commingle, the game's up because there's even in Wyoming, they go, oh, come on, you're not respecting the entity. So why should we respect the entity? So that's
Right.
your biggest single problem.
Welcome to Investing for Generational Wealth. I'm John Lai from Clive Capital, where we help high earners like you invest outside of the stock market to passively achieve long-term wealth generation through superior risk-adjusted returns, long-term passive income and cash flow, and tax benefits. Together with you, we're investing in over 1,000 multifamily apartments under renovation, nearly 100 single-family rental homes under development, more than 350,000 square foot of industrial real estate, over $700,000 of private loans, nearly 40 oil and gas wells, and we've expanded into other asset classes with the end goal of helping investors create diversified, balanced portfolios. Before we begin, as always, a quick disclaimer. We're not financial advisors. All investments are subject to risks, including the possible loss of the money you invest. So please perform your due diligence before making any financial decisions. And of course, consult your CPA, your attorney, whomever you might want to consult before beginning investments. I'm your host again, John Lai, and welcome to today's episode of The Portfolio Protection Gap: Why Making Money is Only Half the Job with Mark Pierce, founder of Wyoming Trust Attorney. Mark brings a background you don't hear every day. He spent years as a bankruptcy trustee, actually attacking trust and recovering assets for creditors. Then he switched sides and spending decades building the exact kind of structures designed to withstand the same pressures that he began with. So today isn't really theory, it's really practical. It's what he's watched fail up close from both sides of the table. Today, we'll learn about topics such as why structures most investors lean in on, like LLCs, insurance, basic estate plans, and how they often buckle under weight once they're tested, real world triggers that unravel well balanced portfolios, lawsuits, divorces, policy limits, and the like that almost no one plans for, and then why asset protection is a second skill of success. For anyone tracking their fire number or sitting on a growing stack of appreciated real estate, business equity, or private portfolio, this episode will be a wake-up call for you. For those of us who don't know your story, Mark, could you give our audience a brief history of how you got to where you are today?
I'd be glad to, John. Thank you. My family started in the oil gas business in the late 1880s, early 1890s in Ohio and Pennsylvania. So we've gone through about 140 years of ups and downs. And I always say riding a roller coaster would be like riding the economy in the United States over the last 140 years. It's never as good as it seems, and it's never as bad as it seems. So you have to have some ability to land softly. So we moved out to Montana in the early 1900s. We drilled wells. We were successful. We had a well fire that destroyed all of our wealth. The Depression intervened, the Second World War intervened, the 1960s intervened, the up and down in the oil industry intervened. And we finally got out in about the mid 70s, my dad did. And I decided when I graduated from high school, I was going to, in the best way I could, I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I wanted to avoid the downside as well. So I became a CPA. I got a degree in statistics as well. And then I went to law school. And after I got out of law school, you had the collapse of the economy in the coal states, Colorado, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Texas. And there was not one bank alive in 1985 in Colorado that was still alive by 1995. Every one of them collapsed. You had the
Wow.
bank bailout and all that. So I became a bankruptcy trustee because that's where the money was. And administered, I don't know how many bankruptcies. People say, was it more than 1,000? Yes. Under 10,000? Yes. I suppose it was around 2,000 to 3,000 bankruptcies I administered. Most of them pretty straightforward, but you did get into collection issues. And so I learned a lot from that because I litigated in the bankruptcy court, I litigated in the tax court, I litigated in the district court. I know how people attack these things and what their liabilities are and what their weaknesses are. I got out, I began working with a private equity company doing investments into a variety of technology companies. I then went out on my own, did a couple of entrepreneurial ventures, varying degrees of success, some more successful than others. And then in the late 1990s, I'm from Wyoming, and Wyoming was the first state in the United States that developed limited liability companies. And they're the ones that petitioned the IRS to get it taxed in one of four ways, right? Yeah, individual ownership, partnership ownership, or a sub S or a sub C corp. You can take your selection on an LLC. That's because Wyoming pushed that through, and some of the individuals there did it. We also have in Wyoming, they came up with a closed limited liability company that says you can't pierce the corporate veil just because there isn't paperwork. About the only way that you could pierce the corporate veil on a Wyoming LLC, commingling funds shouldn't come as any shock to you. So that is, I think, in and of itself, one of the reasons why you would want a Wyoming LLC, because you can't get in trouble with them. Because
Right.
most people come in at the end of the year and say, I think maybe I need annual minutes. And you say, great, when was the last time you did it? And it's 1930 or something like that. Or more like the time. We've
Yeah.
never kept any pieces of paper. Or they reach inside of a garbage sack and said, here, maybe you can find something here. So Wyoming dispensed with all of that. So we've been at kind of the forefront of asset protection for a long period of time. And then they came up with the Domestic Asset Protection Trust in 1997, which is a wonderful schematic because it fits the same outline that you had with Standard Oil of Ohio or any of the one of the corporate conglomerates that you see today, the Rockefeller banks, et cetera, et cetera. And what it allows you to do is to establish under a trust umbrella your ownership of assets. And that trust umbrella, let's be honest with you, the Vanderbilts have a trust, the Rockefellers have trust. There are a lot of people who have trust just walking down the street you would never guess have trust. It
Hmm.
allows them to maintain their business interests as they see fit and maintain their family relations as they see fit. Because the biggest undercutting most of the time with a family business is going to be the family itself. I said that's the weak underbelly. You can get rid of the structural issues that you have on creditor relations, that sort of thing. That's a legal precept. You can get through that. But what you can't get through is divorces, criminal behavior that goes beyond policy limits on insurance liability, and that sort of thing. So that's briefly the outline that I've got. I've been doing that now. I've been doing trust work for 40 some years, but I've been doing the umbrella concept since 1997 in Wyoming. In Wyoming in 1997 decided that we have a banking industry and the banks have all these collection mechanisms. Let's get rid of some of those collection abilities so we can strengthen debtor creditor relationships in favor of the debtor, and let's get into the trust business. So that's why you see such favorable laws in Wyoming on the trust side.
Got it. Love that. Thank you for that background. It's
Sure.
great taking the audience through a little bit of a history of how you got to where you are today, and then the history of kind of trust and bankruptcy law as well.
Yeah.
So you spent years as a bankruptcy trustee and going after debtors, trust, and recovering assets for creditors. What do you see from that side of the table that most people never really do see? Is there anything that's interesting, maybe even alarming?
Yeah, what you got to tell people is that when you have a problem, you're reacting to the problem, and the law doesn't really protect you when you react. If you
Right.
plan in advance and put yourself into a position where you can defend your assets, the law protects that because you're full disclosure with your creditors. And you've gotten into these real estate investments. The best protection you can have on a real estate investment is a holding company, underlying LLCs, and umbrella policies, umbrella
Hmm.
insurance. And if the umbrella insurance doesn't hold up, if something goes wrong with that or they go beyond their policy limits, which you're seeing a lot more of these days, particularly in the malpractice field with dentists and with medical doctors, because the insurance has become so expensive, they can't maintain the full amount of the coverage. So the attorneys are going after the doctors themselves. Those are the things that you've got to be really careful of. That's what you provide there. But you can enhance that. If you have if you have your professional practice out to the side, away from the ownership of the assets that are employed in that in a management services organization, MSO, you can isolate liability so that you don't lose everything when you have an issue that comes up in one LLC. So you have a massive fire as a result of something that you're responsible for. The policy limits don't cover it, but they can't get from that LLC to the next apartment complex that you have over in another LLC. They're completely
Right.
isolated legally. And that's really important. And that's one of the biggest liability issues that people have is and then they start commingling the money. So you've got LLCs here, and then you've got a holding company
Yeah.
or a series of holding companies. You maintain the appropriate working capital in the LLC. When you get more working capital than you need, you declare a dividend up to the holding company. The holding company then puts it up into an asset protection trust. The asset protection trust then invests it where it wants to invest, to increase the investments that they have, predominantly in real estate these days. But you isolate one real estate development from another. And that's critical importance right there. So that'll
Oh,
protect you with the umbrella policy. And if that fails, then you've got the LLC. And if that fails, then you've got the trust behind that. And then you can
right.
sleep well at night.
Yeah. I've always thought of trust as an instrument to be used on the personal side for families and such, not so much on the business side, but it sounds as if trust can be and should be used on the business side as well.
Absolutely. Where do
Yeah.
you think the Rockefellers got all their money?
Yeah,
They
right.
didn't have it from the business side. They got it from the business funneling into trusts.
Got it. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. Interesting. What made you switch sides from unwinding asset protection to helping companies, individuals build asset protection policies and such?
Very easy. On the creditor side, you're always reacting to what somebody else did and going off after their weaknesses. And I guess there's a business to that, a benefit to that. I don't particularly like beating people up. When I
Right.
was younger, I didn't mind so much. I had to
Yeah.
cover the rent, and these people were probably guilty of something anyway.
Yeah.
But it allows you to get to know people a little bit better and to put together a structure for them and to implement that structure and to allow them to succeed. And that's a much more pleasant experience than meeting them in a court and questioning them about what it is they've done wrong with their lives. Yeah.
What is, in one sentence, the biggest misconception investors have about asset protection? Is it a legal misconception? Is it a psychological one?
Oh, I think it's psychological. I think
Psychological.
that, like you said, you didn't realize that you could use it for business and personal. That's what it's set up to do, is to provide for the legacy of your family. And you
Hmm.
can't project the legacy of your family unless you protect it from the downside. And I don't know, do you have children?
I do, yes.
Are they married?
They're not. One's going to college and the
Okay.
other's younger. Yep.
They'll probably get married at some point in time. And if you've got four kids and four of them get married, the odds are two of them are going to be divorced.
Yeah.
That's just the statistics you're playing with. And people
Statistics.
say, oh, absolutely lovely girl, or absolutely lovely young man, on and on. And then it turns out maybe they're not so lovely in the divorce process. You have to
Mhm.
make sure that you cut those ties off and you maintain the wealth for the family, not for the people that come and go in the family. So you
Yeah.
maintain it for the benefit of your children, your grandchildren, that sort of thing, and the efficacy of the family. And a trust is nothing more than a contract. So it's a contract amongst members of the family as to this is how we conduct our business and our life. If you want to be a part of the business, you take this route. If you don't want to be a part of the business, you can take that route. It doesn't mean we cut you off from the benefits of the business. If there are distributions that come out, you'll get compensation in that way so that you can go on with your life and have a better life from it.
Yep.
But that's what it is. But I think it's a mental thing because all of us, we, I don't know what your background is, but most of us didn't come from the Rockefeller side of the.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, I had to work my way through college, and
Exactly.
there are benefits to that. And
Yeah.
most of the people I know started scratching it out, making a little bit of living, getting ahead, investing, being conservative, guarding their wealth, that sort of thing. We don't think that we deserve this sort of stuff. And we think we
Mm.
can get an asset protection trust. As, oh my goodness, are we cheating somebody? No, the law allows you to do it. In fact, the banks are encouraging you to do it. So what you're
Right.
trying to do is you're trying to cut off those non-consensual liabilities. If you go to a bank and borrow money, that's consensual. You should pay that back. You put up collateral for you, you put up your goodwill for you, you do all these things to make sure the bank is paid back. Fair enough. Non-consensual creditor, somebody has a car wreck with somebody who borrowed your car and they come after you individually because of a negligent oversight or something. Is that a consensual liability? No, it's a non-consensual. So if they want to go beyond the policy limits, that's up to them, but they can't come after me and my LLCs. So
Right.
that's where you get. And I think the complexity that you have within families, and let's say you have two, three, four kids, and the level of complexity that comes once they start getting married and divorced and married again and having bifurcated families and all that sort of stuff. I went through one here the other day, and a friend of mine and I, it took us 2 weeks to draft between this guy was in the process, he'd been divorced twice, had gotten married again, maybe divorcing this woman, but he wanted to take care of her family, his family, grandkids.
Jeez.
And if this grandkid died, then that took us 2 weeks. We're
Yeah.
talking 80 hours at 12.50 an hour each. That's a
Right.
big bill, right? And then when
Yeah.
we got
Yeah.
done, we looked at it and said, I think we need to give it a week and come back and look at it and see if it still makes sense. Better yet, we should get a third attorney to review it.
There we
So
go.
talk about a complexity, right? And this was a
Yeah.
guy who
Yeah.
he just started out 30, 40 years ago in the insurance business and became very wealthy doing it. And he wanted to provide
Hmm.
for everybody, including a foundation he has and that kind of stuff. He's just adopting a trust at this time. for the benefit of step families, his families, grandchildren, all these things, and an aunt that he really liked. That sort of stuff. The last generation, I think his dad was a house painter. But at the end of his life, had a little money, drank a beer, watched the Red Sox play, that sort of stuff. You're in good. Yeah.
Yeah.
But now it's just getting into that mentality that I've been really lucky and I should plan to help the next generation along.
Just backing up a little bit, asset protection trusts, are they primarily used for businesses, for families, but to protect against business assets, or are they for any type of asset?
Yeah, for any type of asset, you can put your businesses in that, and there's separate structures for that. And you put your personal wealth in there as well, because what you want to
Hmm.
be able to do is say, okay, you're generating wealth over here in a business, you're developing that business, it's under this umbrella here. You want to take the excess wealth that comes out of that, put it into a family trust, and then invest it for things like pension funds or benefits out to kids or foundations or anything else that you want to do, the charitable work that comes into play. And so the answer is both, and there's just different subsets of different slides that they go into.
Yeah, that makes sense. You've also said that investing and protecting your capital are slightly different skills. Why do so many successful investors only master one of them? And they're primarily the investing aspect of it. And is this a blind spot for high income W-2 earners, or does it just hit business owners?
You tell me, really, at the end of the day, don't you have to ask yourself once in a while, what is it I'm not seeing? Because you can see
Right.
so many short-sighted behaviors over the course of a profession, your professional life, short-sighted behaviors. You think, oh, that's so easy, right? And then you run
Yeah.
into somebody who looks at you and goes, wait, why haven't you done this? And you go, I didn't even think to do it. Just not seeing that as being a potential risk for me. So that's why think some of the best business people, some of the best accumulators of wealth don't just see the upside, they see that potential for downside and they're always hedging their bets. So there's a
Yeah.
number of different ways that you hedge bets. And I've seen over the years, we've used Swiss banks or that sort of things for people just to put, say, you've got an extra $1 million, you put it in Switzerland and you just leave it there and they manage it. That all pays for everything. You disclose it to the government as you're obligated to do. You put it in a trust, you file the tax reforms, you do everything that you're supposed to do. But at the end of the day, nobody else can get to that $1 million. That's your absolute fallback fund if everything else fails at the end of the day. If you take a
Mhm.
look at where the Swiss franc was in 1974 versus today, you could leave it sitting in cash in bags and be ahead of where you would be almost with anything else in the American economy outside of technology.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. So most of our audience are could be business owners, they could be real estate owners. They might have an LLC or two protecting their rental property or businesses. Where do LLCs actually fall apart under pressure? Could you explain that? And then, of course, the backstop is the asset protection trust. But LLCs, can you talk a little bit about that? Because most everyone think LLCs are a great way of protecting myself, but it sounds like it's not. LLCs plus an umbrella policy.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You get into a limited liability company, you come into it, where did you organize it? Because the laws in the Wyoming are very forgiving. Like I said, you don't even have to have documents. It's fine. It's called Kitchen Table LLC. You sit around the kitchen table, everybody agrees to disagree, and you go forward, right? That's your family.
Yep.
That doesn't work in a lot of states. You have to have the paperwork. So if you go to a place like Michigan or Ohio and you do an LLC like that, you've got a problem. But I see the biggest problem as being most of the time is people running their personal expenses without counting them as personal expenses or compensation, or they
Hmm.
wash money back and forth. There's like, oh, I've got a project over in this residential property and I need to cover it with money from this residential. I'll just write a check. So you see the money going back and forth. That's commingle. Once you
Right.
commingle, the game's up because there's even in Wyoming, they go, oh, come on, you're not respecting the entity. So why should we respect the entity? So that's
Right.
your biggest single problem. So a lot of times what I tell people is that take an LLC like Wyoming and organize it and buy your real estate properties into Wyoming and let's say organize them in Texas. So you register in Wyoming, you get a certificate to do business in Texas. Now, the laws of Texas are going to apply on the debtor creditor relationships and that sort of thing on that LLC, but the administrative aspects in Wyoming will apply. So when you get beyond the working capital reserves that you need, and I usually think 6 months is more than adequate. I've never seen anybody pierce a corporate veil if someone had 6 months of working capital reserves to run through before they ended up in trouble, ever. So
Hmm.
anything over 6 months, wash it up into a holding company and then disappear it into the trust and it goes someplace else. as you're legally able to do. You're supposed to accumulate this wealth. Hudson's Bay Company from the 1800s, this is how they attracted and retained principal. So
Hmm.
these are the investment principles that go into our economy, into our laws to allow this to happen. You're not cheating anybody. You're just working the laws the way to be worked. So that's how you take the assets out, but don't commingle back and forth and develop the discipline to get that accounting down. And I tell people, you got to have a good accountant. You got to start with a good bookkeeper, and then you got to have an accountant. I just heard a story the other day where this guy was doing his own accounting, saving a little money, and he had not deducted the depreciation on his real estate investment for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And so when he went to sell it, they said there shouldn't be any depreciation recapture because I never took any depreciation. And the IRS said, oh, no, you had to take the depreciation. The fact that you didn't is your problem. So you
Right,
missed the
right.
deduction, but you're still going to have the recapture.
Oh, geez.
Can you imagine? That's an extra
Yikes.
22% on the recapture. So the
Yeah.
company said, wow, hey, you saved a bunch by doing it yourself, didn't you?
No. Gosh.
So,
No, agreed. Yeah, agreed.
yeah. So I think at the end of the day, penny wise, pound foolish, you got these guys come in, get a good accountant who can get you set up. And
Yep.
then every year when you come in, have them review what you've done and do it. Because if
Yeah.
you just get used to doing it in 2 or 3 years, it just becomes second nature. And so you don't have the
Yeah.
problem with it. And that's what I see the biggest failure is most of the time. People just don't follow the protocols they set up.
Yeah, thank you for that. I definitely agree on the accountant, the CPA, the bookkeeper. Getting a great one early on just avoids a lot of the headache downstream, right? So it's definitely useful to have that and an attorney as well. So those two are the key players on your team that you should get early on.
Yeah. And
Fantastic.
why don't you go find an attorney who knows something about trusts, LLCs, and litigation within that context and has some bankruptcy experience?
Right.
You're gonna get a real, I'm not gonna sit there and sugarcoat it for you. I'll tell you how this stuff works, right?
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes.
So if you're looking for somebody to say, oh yeah, it's okay what you did, don't worry about it. I'm not the guy. I'll get you
Yeah.
straightened out though.
Yeah.
Yeah, mixed
Can
bless.
you talk a little bit about, we haven't really focused on revocable living trusts versus irrevocable, right? And it sounds like asset protection trusts. Maybe you can go into some detail about that versus the revocability of these trusts and how they protect assets against creditors.
Yeah, if it's a revocable trust, then you can just revoke it and get rid of it what you want. That offers you
Yeah,
absolutely no asset protection at all.
got it.
You
Okay.
may have LLCs underneath it. That may provide you some protection, but the trust itself provides you none because if you can break it, the creditors can break it.
Yeah. What is the benefit of a revocable trust, if
It
any? Like
avoids
it,
it avoids it going through probate.
yeah. Oh,
So
I
I,
see.
I
Okay.
think for most people, if you've lived in the same house for 30 years, it's paid off, you've got a pension fund, you've got some money in the bank, you're not involved in business, you don't really have any sort of liabilities that you'd run into in your retired couple, I think it's perfect for them. And I
Okay.
think that fits a great, very high majority of the people in the United States get a revocable trust, and that's fine. And I think that they should have one because if you've ever sat through a probate before, you wonder why you're giving up 10 to 15% of you can read and write, right? Can you read and write?
Right,
It's fine.
right.
Why you're relying on a judge and a lawyer to read and write for you?
Yeah,
Can you not do it yourself? It's a
right.
frightening. Are you afraid of this? I had a client come in one time when I was in Wyoming. She sat down with her husband. I said, let me explain the difference between probate and that. She said, no, save it. She says, I just went through probate with my mother's estate. I'm done. Here's what we're doing.
It's
And
funny.
it was, you just look at this and say, if you don't have an estate plan, at least get a revocable trust.
It makes
Yeah,
sense.
at least do that. Your kids should pay for it because it saves them all the aggravation of running their parents through something like that, running their parents' estate through that. And I had,
Yep.
gosh, I can give you my parents. My dad went out and did his own will, right? And then he went across the
Hmm.
street to a bar and had two people witness the will, which is called a witness attestation, and it wasn't
Right.
notarized. So when they passed away, the attorney had to go back and find these two guys. My dad died in his 80s.
Wow.
These
Yeah.
guys were still at the same bar in their 90s having a drink
Oh,
every
wow.
afternoon. And the lawyer goes, "Can you believe I found them? Because
Right.
if I hadn't, we'd have had to fall back on the statute." I was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, yeah." I don't know. I guess he
Yeah.
thought he was doing the right thing. So it turned out just by blind luck. So at least get a revocable trust. But
Okay.
if you've got businesses, if you're worth more than, if you got outside the value of your house, you're worth 500,000 or more and you're accumulating wealth, get into a trust structure. If you're worth more than a million and you're still accumulating wealth, you've got to be into a trust structure because there's no other way to do it. Now, on the tax side, if you, for a couple, $30 million is where estate taxes become an issue. That's
Right.
less than 1/10 of 1% of the population, maybe even less than that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you think you're going to be over $30 million, there's things that you can do to lower, if not eliminate, that tax structure. But for most people, they've probably already gotten that taken care of because how many people have you run into that are worth 30 million plus net on a liquidated basis?
Yeah. Yeah. You would imagine not very many. In our audience, there's probably a few. We might talk about that offline
Ah,
after the session, but yeah, I'll put a little tickler for myself. So, okay. Moving on, let's talk about triggers. So the real world triggers that unravel portfolios, I think that's something that might be interesting to our audience. What is the most common lawsuit trigger that you've seen hit investors, whether it's real estate, business ownership, professional practice? And then there's a notion of a look back window for moving assets when claims arise, correct?
yes. Yeah, one of the biggest triggers are divorces. And I know I have a client, I've had a couple clients, and you have a couple states like in New Jersey, New York that don't recognize asset protection trust in that state. However, if you enter into an asset protection outside the state as to the movable assets,
Yeah.
then the agreements that you come into with your spouse and your children are going to be domiciled in wherever that trust is formed so that it will not be a part of the divorce estate. And that's a real critical aspect because it preserves the integrity of the family businesses at that point in time. So divorce is a real triggering aspect, but you can plan around that. Economic downturns. You've
Hmm.
seen, it seems to me like, you remember the crash 2008, there was another
Yep.
2012. And one day it was sky's the limit. The next day you couldn't sell a stock, right?
Right.
1987, I was doing deals in 1987 and the market crashed. And I read the reason for the crash, and then NASD put out a study about 6 months after the fact. And you know why it crashed? Because everybody wanted to sell and no one wanted to buy. It took words like that. That's good. So there's no liquidity in the market. So this idea that you were going to have market makers and they would stay the market and they would reduce the volatility, that went out the window. And so
Right.
they opened up the market, right? Remember, they got really used to have to sell 8, 16, that sort of thing. And now so you can digit interesting stuff and you market match all the way through. So I don't know if that's increased the volatility or decreased the volatility. But I do know that when you have those really rapid declines and you have them over a period of time, you're going to suffer some real degradation in your asset value. And if
Yeah.
that impacts the business and the cash flow of the business against your debt, you got to be prepared for that. No matter, like I say, no matter how good it gets, it doesn't hurt to put some money off to the side and use that as your piggy bank to get back into the game. And there was a
Yeah.
guy, remember T. Boone Pickens? He was a wildcatter back.
Yeah. Yep.
T. Boone Pickens said the best lesson he ever got was from an old wildcatter. Look at him and said, Boone, if you don't have to do a deal, you'll start making good deals. So I've watched people who've accumulated wealth during the financial crashes. They had the money to go out and buy something. They had the cash to stem the loss. They had the cash to get somebody out. And they
Yeah.
did it and they bought it for dimes on the dollar. And
Yeah.
then when the market started coming back, because the market always starts to come back, and I saw it, I was in Denver in the 1980s, and I saw one particular group bought these shopping centers for nothing, just their own
Hmm.
personal recognizance, and
Right.
started operating and brought him back by 2000. That were tens of millions of dollars. And now they own large segments of Denver, which has been a booming city. I would imagine they're close to a billion.
Hmm.
And they started
Yeah.
out with
Wow.
nothing in 1987, but they had cash.
Yeah.
They had
Yeah.
access to cash.
Yeah.
So that's why I say get a little rat hole out there that nobody else can get a hold of and make it a legal rat hole. So if
Yeah.
you need to put money in a Swiss bank and it's disclosed, good luck, put it there. Put it into an asset protection trust or bridge it between the two. And then that way you've got the money to get back into the game when you see the crash. But I see
Yeah.
divorces, and then you know what I'm beginning to see in the medical industry, the liability extends beyond the malpractice liability because the
Hmm.
insurance company, the hospitals and whatnot can only afford so much insurance. And the rewards that are coming back are just been incredible. These
Hmm.
people, I see
Wow.
some downside there. Get it if you're in a practice group, get an MSO, put in asset protection trust, isolate your liability away from your professional liability. So that's what I
Got
see.
it.
I think those are the triggers.
Do prenups shield some of the assets away from, I guess, a divorcee versus an asset protection trust? How do they interrelate? How do they shield each other? Well, which one's better?
Oh God, an asset protection trust. Because in an asset protection trust, you have a statute that says you can't get in here.
Right.
And this individual had that trust before you married them. And that trust, the beneficial interest that individual had in the trust is not a property interest, so it's not a part of your marital estate.
Okay.
The answer is just no, all the way across. You can't do it.
Hmm.
36 states have considered it. All 36 came out the same way. It's not
Hmm.
property, it's not part of the marital settlement. So why would you not do that? Now you can go into a prenup. And there, I was living up in Boulder at the time. There was a major firm there that was doing a lot of divorce litigation. They came to the conclusion they could no longer do prenups because, irrespective of the party's intention getting in, irrespective of the amount of disclosure, it was always worthwhile for that attorney to go after that prenup on the basis of fraud because they hadn't disclosed everything or
Huh.
had missed the disclosure on something. So you ended
Right.
up in litigation. So then the law firm, they're not getting paid to come and testify. They're not getting paid to open their books and records. There's no attorney-client privilege because it was part of a contract that needed disclosure. So these guys just finally said, we're not doing prenups anymore. There's no upside
That's
for us. Good
interesting.
luck to
Yeah.
you. Yeah, go
Yeah.
online,
Yeah.
get something there, but it ain't going to work. And for the most part, I don't know. There's always somebody feels like they've been wronged. So the prenup should be something that we could go after. I could get something out of this person. And I came to the conclusion that, let's say you're worth 10 million and you have a prenup and somebody comes in and they're in that relationship and you're going to get a divorce and they come in with an attorney, write them a check for 1 million and just to get rid of them because the rest of it could only go downhill from there. They're probably going to
Right.
get something. So that's my opinion on prenups.
Okay. Good.
And yet,
Thank you for that.
every doctor I find getting married for the third time insists that prenup's going to work for
That's funny.
them. Yeah, in
That's
spite of
funny.
all evidence to the contrary, good luck to you.
So you spoke a little bit about Wyoming being a place to get the trust. We talked about why it makes sense, and there's a lot of great things about it. There's this notion about full faith and credit clause. How does that actually work in a person's favor if they set up a trust in Wyoming? And does it matter if it's obviously Wyoming is domestic, but domestic versus offshore for most of our audience?
Yeah, I think we'll talk about offshore trust here in a second. But Wyoming, if you have movable versus immovable assets, if you have real estate
Yeah.
in California, you're not going to tell a court in California they don't have authority over that real estate. They can say, I can look out the windows. I got the authority, man. You see
Yeah.
that badge of the United States of America? That says I got the authority. That's tough.
Yeah.
But let's say you have a stock and a cash account or LLC ownership in LLCs that aren't domiciled in California, and they're all in Wyoming. So somebody gets a judgment against you in Oregon. Okay, they get a judgment against you from Oregon, and then Oregon says, "Hey, let's take this out to Wyoming. We know that John's got an asset protection trust. Let's enforce it against that asset protection trust." You have the full faith and credit clause in the United States Constitution, right? So one state has to recognize the efficacy of the judgment of another state court in the enforcement of these orders. So they bring it out to be enforced. And Wyoming says, "You bet, we recognize it." Now, there was a case called Cleopatra. I just love easy court case to remember, right? Came out of
Right.
California. She was the beneficiary of a trust of an oil man. And I guess it must have been a big trust. She gets married to some guy. She has a couple kids. Somehow the guy ends up with the kids. He sues her for support. She gets an award against her for support. And the trust won't pay it out. The trust decants itself to South Dakota, which it was allowed to do. So it's sitting in South Dakota. So the ex-husband comes out, domesticates the judgment in South Dakota, and seeks to enforce it against this asset protection trust. The South Dakota state says, okay, we're not just pulling this out willy-nilly. This is the enforcement of taxes outside the jurisdiction that impose the taxes. So you've got U.S. law deciphering what the full faith and credit clause pertains to, not to the efficacy of the judgment, the collectability of the judgment against certain assets. So if an
Mhm.
asset's exempt in Wyoming, you can't get it no matter what the exempt assets are in California. So this California judgment came out and they sought to enforce the child support orders against this woman in South Dakota. And South Dakota said, we recognize the decree and she does owe you that. But there's nothing here for you to collect against because we don't allow the collection of child support orders as a veritable debt against this asset protection trust.
Got it.
So there you go. That's what happens.
Yeah.
So in Wyoming, you come out and you say, okay, I want to get inside this asset protection trust. For what? This guy crashed his car. He was drunk. It killed 32 people. There's 32 million in liability. There's 50 in that trust we want in there. Wyoming's going to say, that's terrible, but that's not a recognized claim.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's how faith and credit works. And so people always come back. Most lawyers went through a common law class, but they didn't go through a collections class. They'll say, full faith, you got to pay. And so I did an in-depth analysis and I got a page published on my website that says, here's the case law and here's how this stuff works. And it works. So there you go. And I think I've got the reference to the divorces as well. Matrimonial law. 36 states have recognized it as the best way in which to have a prenup.
We'll have to get a link to that. I think that'd be interesting to link out.
Yeah, it's under WyomingTrustAttorney.com. They're all right there.
Okay. At what net worth or risk level does this make sense? Do W-2 professionals should start to think about this? I think you mentioned above 500,000 for just a revocable trust, above maybe $1 million, where it starts to make a little bit more sense. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Or maybe it's a percentage of your net worth. Where does that begin?
I think if you're in a high risk liability field, and I counsel a kid who was ending up, he'd gone through med school and he's become a neurosurgeon focusing on the spinal cord. And he's just coming out of his residency and getting a practice going. So I suggested a couple things: join a practice, get an MSO going in that practice to save you some money, a lot of money, and send him the schedule for it. I said, and most importantly, get an asset protection trust now. Yeah. Because you're nothing but liability, man.
Yeah.
Two ways. The first is you're gonna have problems because I had some neurosurgery done 8 years ago. And I really befriended this doctor. He's a great guy. And I said, how many neuros do you do a year? He says, about 300. And it's to various degrees of success. And they went on and on about this could happen, that could happen. This is your level of recovery. This is what you're looking for. And he was dead on the money. But you can't be dead on the money on something like that. You're going to get sued at some point in time. Something's going to happen. And you never know what will happen in front of a jury at all. Ever. 90% of all litigants think they're going to win when they go to the court system. But that doesn't balance out, does it? We only get 100% and you're at 180. So you might want to adjust your expectations. So that sort of thing. So I looked at that guy and I said, you should get an asset protection trust now. You should get it set up. You should get it in a certain way. And you should get a good accountant, because we're going to have to disclose this. And I want the disclosure done now, and start doing it right away. And then after about 2 or 3 years, all these strange words that come in, you're going to know what they mean. And then it becomes second nature to you. And once it's second nature, your business becomes easy because you've got the structure down. You just know how to imprint it on what you're doing, and you're going to make money. And here's how you're going to do it. And I said, and then when you start, you can take booking of surgeries away from the surgery itself and remove that money from the state for income tax purposes and put it in Wyoming. So you're going to save 12% on 25% of your bookings. So there you go. If you book $2.5 million, 12.5%, $2.5 million seems to me it's not such a bad deal. $500,000 a year.
Sure.
Yeah. So $500,000 a year compounded over that sounds like real money to me. I don't know. Maybe not for you. But that's what Einstein said. He says the most inevitable force in the world is compound interest. So you take this stuff out, you save yourself 12%. You're like compounding 12% a year. Why wouldn't you do that? That's the sort of thing. So for that kid, that guy, he's a young man, he's in his 30s. I would say for him, even though you don't have a lot and you got a lot of debt, I would start right now. But for most part, I would say if you're in a business like a real estate business, you've got $500,000 net outside of your pension funds and your house, your residence, that sort of thing. That's a good place to start if you're accruing that wealth, because then you get the imprimatur of how you're going to do it and you get used to how the money flows. And if you get used to how the money flows and you always follow that, you don't have to worry when you're 50 and say, oh, gee, I wrote checks for this LLC out of that LLC, and when money went here, there, you're
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
So it gets you trained into what you should be doing. And it gets a good relationship with your bookkeeper too.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Thank you for that. I have some to-dos to do after this.
You're falling behind.
Yes, I am. After having this conversation. People who invest through their retirement accounts. I've heard retirement accounts are protected in many ways. Can you talk a little bit about that? And that includes self-directed IRAs as well. Can you talk about how much protection those type of accounts get when they're investing in alternative assets, private equity, and the like?
Yeah, you have to be really careful because every state is different. And I know that when I did some work down in Florida, a single member pension fund, any one of a variety of pension funds, was not protected from execution by creditors. So
Right.
you needed to get a second person in it. And it couldn't be your wife because they got husband and wife as one. So you need to get somebody else in it to perpetuate it. So you have to be
Got it.
very careful as to how you structure that. So if you have a business and you're going to run your pension fund through your business, make sure you chip some of your employees in on that. It may cost you a little bit of money, but then you get it. It's completely exempt from execution. So IRAs, pension
I see.
funds, self-directed, all that, just fine. Don't commingle the funds. Don't be writing
Okay.
personal checks out of your pension fund, that
Right.
sort of thing. Second thing is IRAs, pension funds. What was the other? Oh, insurances. Various types of insurances have evolved over the years that are exempt from execution as well, particularly life insurance policies, that sort of thing. So that should definitely be a part of your estate and what you do. If you can afford to do it, some people end up self-insuring. The problem with most people is they start with an insurance policy when they're 30, they pay on it until they're 80, and then it becomes so prohibitively expensive they're basically insuring their own death every year. So then they wonder, why didn't I just rat hole the money to begin with? I don't
Yeah.
know, because you're
Yeah.
always tempted to touch the money.
Right.
I
Right.
think insurance, pensions fund, IRAs. I think that if you get into limited liability companies where the creditor can't execute against that membership interest, I think that's a great way to rat hole money too.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you
Yeah.
for
And
that.
there are a lot of states that do not recognize single member LLCs.
Oh,
So
okay.
you have to be very careful of that. Florida may not recognize them, and there's a whole host of others, a list you can get on the internet that's generally right about that. People say, I'm in an LLC. My wife and I are in this LLC, so we're fine. And the answer is in Florida, probably not. So you
Okay.
need to start working on that as to how you're going to get by that. Now in Wyoming, they recognize single member LLCs. In fact, statutorily, they say we recognize LLCs, so don't be bumping up against us anymore.
Yeah.
So when a Wyoming LLC owns another Wyoming LLC and that LLC owns property in Florida, that's a whole different ballgame. The administrative aspects are controlled by Wyoming law.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm looking at our time and we're bumping up against the time. I could do another episode on this, honestly, because I have so many questions. And so we might schedule another episode. One other
Great.
thing that came to mind is passive investing. As we invest, most of our investors are passively investing in these alternative investments. Do passive LP investors shield themselves from personal liability? Is that capped or is that a myth?
I think that's a myth. If you're into a limited partnership, that partnership interest is completely attachable. So if you get a judgment against you, they can come after that.
Okay. Even as passive investors,
Well,
meaning
if
like
it's
you're not an
if,
active investor, but you're a
right,
passive investor. Yeah.
it depends on the structure of the deal. Okay.
Okay.
So when you get into a limited partnership interest, depends on the state. They can't come out of that limited partnership and come after you. Generally cannot do that
Okay.
unless there's something more there. But if you have a limited partnership interest and someone gets a judgment against you personally, they can come after that limited partnership interest.
I see. I see. Okay. So if you're at the let's say it's an LLC, not necessarily a limited partnership, but LLC structure such that it takes in investors. It's a fund. It takes in investors. I am a passive investor into that fund. As a passive investor, not a limited partner, but as a passive investor, my liability is up to my investment and not exceeding that investment typically. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
you have a creditor individually, they can attach that limited liability company interest unless it's a Wyoming limited liability company.
I see. I see. I see. Okay. Interesting. Huh. Okay. Learned that today. Lots of learnings today. I think we are at the top of the hour. I'd love to schedule another meeting. So I'll count this as part one. Maybe we'll have another part two and another point.
Okay, then we can get really
Um,
interesting.
yes, yes. For those of us who want to learn more about you, about your business, how can they reach you and find out more information?
All right, John, it's WyomingTrustAttorney.com, all one word. So WyomingTrustAttorney.com. You can go to that website, book an appointment, and we'll talk. Better yet, I'm going to send you a hyperlink that you can embed within your podcast, within your website, and they can press for free and get a 30-minute consultation. What'll happen is that we'll send them a questionnaire so that I can review the questionnaire, and then we can get right down into what'll give them the benefit of their 30 minutes.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. We'll include that in the description of this podcast as well.
Great.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast on whichever platform you're listening to so we can continue bringing you the best educational content like this one. Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Mark. Until next time, keep learning to invest for generational wealth.
Thank you, John.